Mr. President, I listened to the statements that were made this morning on the floor and this afternoon on the floor of the Senate, and there were some omissions of fact which need to be reminded to the people who are following. It was 4 months ago when we faced a deadline to come up with assistance for Ukraine. You know what's been going there for 2 years, a war fought by the most courageous people I know, the Ukrainians, against the invasion of Vladimir Putin. The United States, NATO allies, and many others have been standing behind the Ukrainians, and we knew that they needed additional resources to continue the battle this year. 4 months ago, the President put together a supplemental appropriation bill for that purpose. It also addressed the situation in the Middle East, the Far East, and the looming humanitarian crises around the world, including Gaza, that needed to be addressed. We wanted to move on this on a timely basis, but there was an objection. The objection came from the other side of the aisle, Republican senators who said, you need to include border security. What is happening on our southern border cannot be ignored. We discussed it for a period of time and then agreed with them. We were going to work together on a bipartisan basis, Republicans and Democrats, to change what was happening on America's southern border, to make us safe and to bring order to the situation. Several of our colleagues were chosen to engage in the negotiations for this issue. This is a tough issue. Any issue involving immigration is extremely difficult. That's why it's been over 30 years since Congress has passed immigration reform, when we know that the body of laws that governs our immigration and our border needed attention long ago. 3 senators, very diverse senators, were chosen to negotiate an agreement if they could. They were led by Senator Lankford, James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, who was chosen by the Republican Senate caucus to be their negotiator. Several of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle assured me that he had worked hard at it, understood the issue, was prepared to accept this challenge and responsibility. So Senator Lankford led in that regard. 2 other senators, Senator Sinema of Arizona, who is characterized as an independent senator at this point in her career, and Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut were the 3rd senators who sat down and started negotiating together. They put together a package. It took them 4 months. We had to postpone the negotiations for Christmas, for other breaks that were normal in the Senate calendar, but they were given wide berth to come up with an agreement, a bipartisan agreement, and it was announced last Sunday. Senator Schumer, the Democratic leader, released it on Sunday and said, I'll heed the advice of senators from both sides of the aisle that members should have 72 hours to review this document before they have to vote on it. The vote we're talking about this afternoon is that vote, more than 72 hours after this proposed bill was released. What did this bill do that would gain the support of the Democratic and Republican senators who were negotiating it? What it did was to address many issues, primarily border issues, that related to security. The current situation at our border is unsustainable. We are being overwhelmed by the number of people who are showing up in record numbers. That reflects several things. Refugee crisis around the world. Those of you who watched 60 Minutes this week noticed that there are people from China who are now coming to our southern border to come into the United States. No one anticipated that when we talked about the asylum laws several years ago, but that is a fact of life. People are coming from all around the world to come to our southern border, and they are overwhelming the resources of that border. This bill, this agreed-to bill, this bipartisan bill that is being considered here this afternoon, was an effort by both sides to limit the number of people coming across the border at any given time. It gave new authority to the President of the United States to cap and limit the number of people crossing the border at a given time. When those on the other side say we don't need this bill, that is legislative authority that the President currently doesn't have and was included. There were billions of dollars in investment in technology to stop the flow of not only those who are undocumented and illegal, but also the flow of fentanyl into the United States, just to name 2 major features of this bill. It had many provisions hammered out over months of negotiation. Those of us who came back this week said we were finally going to do something on the border, and the good news is it's bipartisan. Senator Lankford has signed off on it, and the other two senators representing the Democratic side of the aisle signed off on it as well. And we were prepared to see this passed and hope that for the best in the House of Representatives. And then the bottom dropped out. One thing happened that we didn't anticipate. One person in America came out against the proposal. One person said to the Republican senators, sorry, no matter what you agreed to, it's unacceptable. Blame it on me, he said, but we are not going to have a bipartisan agreement on the border. This is unacceptable. That one person is Donald Trump. He made that announcement, and at that point, many of the Republicans who had indicated an interest in this measure walked away from it. And today, I'm afraid we're going to see that in the vote. It's really sad when you consider what's at stake. The lives are at stake all across the United States. People who are trying to come to this country with good intentions and good purposes and would make us a better nation are being caught up in this political battle. So when Senator Schumer comes to the floor and expresses his disappointment, he speaks for the entire Senate Democratic Caucus. We are disappointed that we came up with a bipartisan bill with Senator Lankford, who has been a stalwart in this whole experience. He's shown principle and values. He negotiated in good faith. He produced a bipartisan bill, and we're prepared to vote for it this afternoon. The sad reality is the assistance to Ukraine, which was one of the original reasons for this conversation, is still in doubt. I hope at the end of the day that the Democrats can lead the way with the Republicans and provide the survival assistance absolutely necessary for the people in Ukraine. They are watching carefully. At the end of next week, a group of us will be going to the Munich Security Conference in Germany. It's held each year. It's a bipartisan delegation, and we go to speak for the United States. What we have to say to our European allies will depend on the votes that will follow today, first and the second vote. Will we stand by Ukraine, or will we walk away from it and let Vladimir Putin have his dream of an expansion of the former Soviet system? I hope not. The people in Ukraine deserve better. We need to stand together with them. There's much to be said as to what this means to the rest of the world, but we've been reminded by our NATO allies who have been loyal to a fault so far, and I hope that they continue to be, that we can't walk away from that situation without inviting disastrous consequences around the world. I'm afraid that if we walk away from Ukraine, they will struggle to survive, and I hope they do, but it'll be a real struggle. In the meantime, it heartens Vladimir Putin and our adversaries around the world to see us waver when it comes to staying with the Ukrainian people. I hope that that vote this afternoon, both votes, are in a positive way, that we can take that message to the rest of the world that we are still there. I also want to say, Mr. President, that it's hard to imagine that the party of Ronald Reagan and John McCain, the party that claimed to take a strong stand against communism, just played right into the hands of former KGB apparatchik Vladimir Putin's hand. That's right, the same Putin who called the collapse of Soviet tyranny the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Putin and his Iranian and North Korean enablers are trying to roll back Western democracy and restore Soviet glory. In the front of the line is Ukraine, where the U.S. and European allies have helped these heroic Ukrainians to repel the Russian invasion. And what is Putin's strategy after suffering staggering losses in equipment and personnel? To bet that the United States will allow partisanship to interfere with its support of Ukraine and hope that former President Trump returns to the White House. That's Putin's dream. Just as we learned when it came to the agreement, the bipartisan agreement on border security, Donald Trump has made it clear that he opposes this continuing assistance to Ukraine. You may recall in 2018, Trump stood next to Putin in Helsinki and said he believed Putin's denials about interfering in our election, while Putin smirked at the podium. By failing to pass national security funding, we would be playing into Putin's hands. Many congressional Republicans have spoken loudly about defending Ukraine and the NATO alliance. They've traveled to NATO summits and even Munich security conferences to support this mission. They've also visited Ukraine, followed by a press conference with belligerent claims that President Biden just wasn't doing enough. But today, The fate of Ukraine hangs in the balance on the floor of the United States Senate. It seems too many of my colleagues have been collectively coward to Donald Trump, who want to thank the supplemental funding agreement for their own cynical reasons. Is that who congressional Republicans are going to entrust with stopping Russian aggression? Make no mistake, it's not only Putin watching and savoring this failure to act, it's Iran, China, North Korea, and others. I think of the late John McCain, how he would look at this situation on the Republican side of the aisle today. He was a fierce critic throughout his life of Russian tyranny, especially Putin's tyranny. He was the target of Putin's early sanctions, as many of us were as well. John McCain took that as a badge of pride, and I do too. It's time we show the same courage here in Congress and make sure that we pass emergency national security funding. I ask, last I checked, protecting democracy and safeguarding American security were bipartisan causes, and they should be still. I'd like to make one last point. It's hard for me to see us visit this issue of immigration and not mention an issue that has been near and dear to me for more than 2 decades. Today I want to tell you the story of a dreamer. Dr. Jacqueline Solis. Hers is the 139th dreamer story I've told on the floor of the Senate. Jacqueline was born in Peru, immigrated to this country when she was 10. She wanted to become a doctor, but she didn't think it was possible because she was undocumented. 12 years ago, in response to a bipartisan request from myself and the late Senator Richard Lugar, President Obama established the DACA program. It's protected more than 800,000 young people like Jacqueline, and thanks to DACA, she was able to attend medical school. I'm proud to say that last year she graduated from Loyola University Chicago's Stritch College of Medicine, the first medical school to accept DACA applicants. She's now completing her pediatrics residency at Emory University Hospital. DACA allowed her to come out of the shadows and give back to the country she grew up in, the country she loves, the United States of America. She hopes to be an agent of change in her community, where she mentors medical students and first-generation low-income students. One of her goals is to open a mobile clinic where she can drive to different communities and help patients. Ask yourself, would America be better off if Dr. Jacqueline Solis and dreamers like her were unable to work in the United States? Still, 20 years later, we are trying our best to make sure that these young people have a fighting chance to be part of America's futures. Last September, a federal judge in Texas declared the DACA program illegal. The decision left in place protections for current DACA recipients while the appeal is pending. These young people live in fear that the next court decision will upend their lives. That would be a disaster. When we get on the subject of immigration, the border is critical, it's important. I want to be part of that conversation. But please, don't forget the dreamers, and don't forget so many people who have proven over and over again that they will be our future and our strength if we give them that chance. I yield the floor.